You're listening to Through Help and Back. Through Help and Back is a podcast focused on mental health, addiction, treatment, recovery, and all things related to personal improvement and wellness. Don't worry, we're not here to talk about problems without solutions, and we're definitely not here to talk about struggles without success. So come with your problems, leave with our solutions. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Through Help and Back. Through Help and Back, as you know, because you're here, is a podcast focused on mental health and addiction issues. Our promise is always from a successful point of view, always from a hopeful, positive perspective. But we like to talk about, like the title says, people that have been through difficult situations, practitioners that have helped them, and how they found success, how they found their way through those challenges, and what life is like on the other side once they've received help and now they're back. I'm really excited about today's show. One of the phrases that you kind of hear in behavioral health is this idea of a mind-body connection. And it's something that everybody, I think, it's worked its way into pop psychology. It's worked its way into media, and people kind of have a general idea of what that means. And as a former therapist, recovering therapist, current therapist, I don't know, a therapy guy, I was always very comfortable working with a mind-body connection, working from the mind, flowing out to the body. But that's a multi-directional relationship. And so we have an expert here today. We have Meg Schnetzer, who is here. She is a trauma-informed somatic practitioner, and she's going to talk with us and educate us on that mind-body connection and how it can actually work in the opposite direction from the body to the mind. So thank you so much for being here, Meg. Glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and Meg is fresh, and she is looking tan, and she's back off vacation. And from what I understand, this was a very relaxing vacation, right? Like it was nothing but smooth sailing at the beach, right?
So relaxing, yeah.
Now, Meg has a family, and as anybody who has a family and goes on vacation and knows, sometimes you need a vacation from your vacation when you get back. So, but we're glad you made time for us today. So let's just kind of dive right in. I mean, I was kind of stumbling around with this before, but trauma-trained somatic practitioner, can you kind of break that apart for us? I guess we'll start with the trauma-trained piece and kind of let us know, what your experience is in that part of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's a mouthful of a title. You did beautifully with it, by the way.
Thank you so much.
Trauma trained, there's a difference. I think the term trauma informed is thrown around a lot, which it's great that people are becoming more trauma informed, but essentially all that means is that you're taking into account that people have trauma, right? And it kind of can switch their perspective on things. Whereas trauma trained is more of we've actually done the work, done the studies, got the certificates, done the thing. So my specialty areas are nervous system regulation. I am what we call polyvagal trained. So polyvagal theory, the latest nervous system model. Have a lot of work in like somatic attachments. So a lot of attachment style type stuff, inner child and somatic integrative parts work, along with certifications in complex PTSD, trauma and resilience. And so I kind of honestly dove in headfirst and just went with a bunch of different avenues for healing, because nobody's nervous system is the same. And so I wanted to make sure I was trained up on several different modalities for healing.
Gotcha. And, the title may have been a mouthful, but what you're talking there in terms of background is certainly a mouthful. So, with trauma-informed, PTSD, traumatic experiences, I think it's fascinating because when people find their way to me as a therapist, or they find their way to a psychiatrist, or they seek help, it's generally because they're having physical symptoms, right? Like things are showing up that are making them uncomfortable. So what are the things that you're typically seeing? Like what are the problems, or what are the symptoms that sort of indicate to somebody like it's time to find a Meg and get into some of this work?
It's a lot of the same. It's, cycles of anxiety, chronic anxiety, it's depression, it's OCD, it's fibromyalgia, chronic pain. It's also some of those self-protective behaviors, the drinking or pursuing toxic partners, procrastinating, just these procedural patterns that people find themselves in and they can't seem to stop. And I'll be honest with you, I would say 90% of the people that come through our programs are people who have been in traditional talk therapy for years, and they feel like they're hitting a wall. they've kind of talked themselves to death and they don't really see much improvement. And so we're kind of a last resort.
Gotcha. Do you, in the field, sort of generally speaking, did you, you may be touching on it a little bit, but do you ever find, I don't know, resistance to looking past talk therapy? Do you find people who are like reluctant, like they have to have the answers and maybe there's something wrong with me? Like, and I wonder as a practitioner, if you've bumped into any of that, like, well, you're not doing therapy. So, how does this work? How does this help? You know what I mean? So you're smiling. So I'm guessing you've heard some of that from your clients and beyond. So what have you heard or what do you run into?
We have, from the client's perspective, a lot of times they are so, they're just so ready to find something that works that they're honestly willing to try anything. But we do find this challenge of when you've spent so long in your head, it's really hard to get out of your head and into your body. And so there is definitely a lot of resistance at first with this idea of being embodied and kind of processing your emotions that way. We also have a lot of resistance sometimes from, the therapy community, therapists in general that just have been doing things the same way for a long time. And what we know is that it takes 15 to 20 years for the medical world and community to catch up to the latest research. And so I realize we're kind of blazing a new frontier here, so it can kind of ruffle feathers sometimes.
Yeah, it's weird. It's so weird because we're all helpers, and we all want what's best for people who are seeking help. But there is a little bit of that tension. And, I think I've always kind of had a little bit of a weird perspective on therapy and offering therapy. And, I run businesses and I've been in practice myself. And I always say that, like, if I'm doing my job well, you don't need me at some point, right? Like I'm one of the few businesses that wants to put myself out of business on an individual level, right? But then when somebody says this isn't working, I'm going to try to do something else. I think some of that stuff flares up which is sort of like, I don't want to say it's cult-like, but I mean, it's sort of like, what is the resistance here? If there's not progress, if there's, why wouldn't we experiment with different ways, So we'll talk about that a little bit too. So when you're talking about that somatic piece and getting into your body, what would be different about working with somebody like you versus coming and sitting on the couch? We don't really do that anymore, but in the chair or whatever, and traditional talk therapy. Can you kind of compare and contrast to how that experience is different?
Yeah, it's different, honestly, in a lot of ways. We don't work in the past. We believe that working in the past is very counterintuitive to the work that we want to do. The problem is not in the past. The problem is how your trauma is being recreated in the present, right? What is it that keeps coming up for you? What are your triggers? What are your trauma responses to that that's disconnecting you from the present? And so knowing we can't change the past and we can only change the present, our goal is to get people unstuck from the past so that they can come into the present. And what we've learned is that the constant recall of traumatic details can really shut down that thinking part of your brain, and it can it can really exacerbate your symptoms as far as your fight, flight, or freeze. And so I use this personal example all the time. I have no problem saying it out loud. I was in talk therapy for years following an assault, and I used to leave therapy and walk across the street to the bar and drink. And if that's not telling, I don't know what is. I was more anxious leaving than I was even going in. And so we do a lot of the focusing on the processing trauma in the body because that's actually where trauma is stored. It's not stored in the conscious part of your brain. It's stored in your body as implicit memory.
So much I want to grab onto there. I'm just like, it's so great. Like Meg's off and running. So when you say we don't work in the past, so I'll start there. So a gentle challenge. So what we've been taught and what we've been taught to believe for so long is that processing is absolutely essential, that you have to find the root cause of the issue. You have to look into your childhood. You have to look at the event and you have to sort of properly process that, or you'll remain stuck and never be able to move forward. You feel a little bit different about that.
I do. It's one of those things where it's less about exploring the event than it is exploring the effect of the event. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't acknowledge what happened. You don't, honor that, know that it forever changed you. Validate it 100%. But the actual trauma itself, it could be a car accident, an assault, a parent walking out. It's not so much what happened. It's figuring out what the emotions, the sensations, and those internalized subconscious beliefs are there because of that event, because that's what keeps us stuck, is operating from those subconscious beliefs.
I wonder if people might not be more familiar with some of those beliefs than the actual core sort of insight or root cause of those beliefs. So what are some of those? I don't know. You didn't say this, but are they sort of self-sabotaging beliefs? Are they negative beliefs? Are they just beliefs related to understanding about how you process the event? Like, what are these beliefs that maybe people would be assigning to that event?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So they're mostly what we would consider self-limiting beliefs about either yourself or the world. So right, like I'm unworthy of love. My worth is tied to accomplishments. I am a burden. I can't rely on anyone but myself, right? These things that we don't know that they're there, but 90 to 95% of the actions we take every day they stem from our subconscious. And so we act in accordance with them all of the time.
Yeah, I've said before on the show, and I'll say it again, I guess, but cognitive dissonance is just so uncomfortable, even if we're not aware of it. And if you have a core belief about yourself, you're going to prove yourself right no matter what. And the easiest way I say that is winners find a way to win and losers find a way to lose. And that's not me calling anybody a loser, but I'm not really scared of that because people call themselves really negative things on a regular basis, right? And then they go out and they bleep stuff up and they ruin relationships and they sabotage it, all to be able to say, I knew it. I knew it. I knew I was going to screw it up because I'm a screw up, you know? So those are the limiting beliefs. And so you're not hypothesis, but I guess your belief is that you may not have those prior to the trauma, but you may carry those forward with you post trauma as a way of like understanding the trauma. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, and they honestly, the majority of them happen in childhood. Um, I considered myself actually to have a fairly decent childhood, and when I went through the program myself, all of my core wounds were back in childhood, and I was kind of shocked by that. But I think the majority happen in childhood. That doesn't mean that later on in life you don't experience something traumatic that further, solidifies that belief in you. But yeah, they're usually there from a really early age.
So is that as simple as maybe, I'm not talking about you specifically, but as a general example, a harsh parent that teaches you you're not good enough, and then fast forward 20 years, an abusive partner that reminds you of that dynamic and reinforces that belief about self that was sort of rooted there previously. Is that the connection you're talking about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, like for me, my dad was a state trooper. So, 26 years in law enforcement. And I love my dad. We have a great relationship. But I feel like I need a disclaimer there.
Yeah, of course. I could feel the but coming. Once all the I could feel BUT, behold the underlying truth, but yeah.
Yes. And he knows this because I've had these conversations, right? He didn't just implicitly teach me, he explicitly taught me you can't trust anyone because he was a cop. I mean, he couldn't trust anyone on his job, it would have gotten him killed. And so he used to tell me, you can't trust anyone, everyone's out to hurt you. And so that was a belief I had from a very young age. Well, fast forward 5 years ago, I'm sexually assaulted by a friend of 15 years who I thought I could trust. Well, what does that do for that belief? It just shows me that no matter how much I think I know someone, I can't trust anyone, right? They're going to hurt me. So we constantly have these experiences that just, like you said, and because we're looking for them, it's that confirmation bias, and we experience them kind of all over again.
To talk about your assault and to talk about, what happened there, what were your, to try to connect it to your work, what were your immediate beliefs following that event? I mean, was it a matter of blaming self and saying, you dummy, you knew not to trust people, or what was the immediate reaction to that trauma?
There's a lot of lack of self-trust that comes with that. And I think in those situations, it's easier to, again, because we get into our logical brain, we're trying to assign some kind of reason or rationale as to why someone would do something so horrific. And there is none. And so it's easier to then blame yourself than it is to believe that someone's capable of something like that. So there was a lot of self blame. I actually, as far as trauma responses go on the nervous system ladder, I shut down immediately. dropped down and was very dissociated for a very long time, just because it was overwhelming. And so, yeah, a lot of, I'm broken, I'm dirty, I can't trust anyone but myself. Nobody gets to control me, just a lot of those that really came up for me.
And when you say shut down for a very long time, I mean, was that, weeks, months, years? I mean, how long was your, I guess, not even recovery cycle, because that's probably still ongoing, but your preparation for a recovery cycle? I mean, how long did it take you to get into action mode? And
Yeah. So I would say I spent the first, my assault was in July. The news of my assault actually came out in a very horrific way. I wasn't the one that got to share that. My assaulter did. And so the information came out well before I was ready to process. And because my family loves me, they pushed me into talk therapy well before I was ready. And I was completely dissociated, I would say, for probably the following 2 years in talk therapy. And was just hitting a wall, coping in ways that I'd never coped before, binge drinking, reckless behaviors. Um, it wasn't until I stopped therapy and got into this type of work with healing with body first approaches that I was able to come out of that dissociative state.
You made mention earlier on, and this is one of those things I wanted to grab, and this is a perfect time, that you said protective behaviors like drugs and alcohol. And then you gave an example of, I would leave therapy, obviously feeling too much too soon, and I would go drink. So you view some of those quote unquote destructive behaviors as having an actual, anesthetic protective feature to them. You view those as protective behaviors. Tell me more, please. Help me understand that.
I think a lot of people refer to those type of behaviors as self-destructive or self-sabotaging or self-limiting. And that's just all a part of, we invalidate our own emotions a lot, right? Or our own behaviors a lot. And so for me, I view them all as self-protective. And a lot of that I do with my clients, that work of starting to extend your self-grace and self-compassion, because at the end of the day, our nervous system's number one priority for us is survival. It doesn't matter if those parts aren't authentic to who you are. Like, we will forsake authenticity every single time if it means surviving.
So even something that ultimately, like drugs, right, that can kill you, you feel in the short term, it may feel as if it actually helps increase the chances of survival because it keeps me from the pain.
I think they all serve a purpose. Yeah, for a time. I do. I think that when we resort to things like that, our pain is too overwhelming at the time to process. Yeah.
How long, and obviously, you know this, but full permission to tell me to mind my own business and move on. But how long between the attack and this announcement of the attack? Because you said your perpetrator, your abuser stole that from you. Can you walk me through that? Like, how long was that time, and how does somebody, like, I'm certain he didn't announce himself as an abuser, so I assume there was some battling narratives that were happening there.
Yeah. So my situation was, they're all complicated, but he was a friend of, 15 years. I actually met him at church. He was the kind of friend we would go to. He lost his sister really young, and I went to the funeral. He came to my grandparents' funerals. We sang on praise team together. Like, we were, I fully trusted him. And he was actually he was going through the academy to be a police officer himself. So we could, that's a whole other thing to unravel. And he was also a photographer. And so my assault was not quick. It wasn't like you see on the movies. I was actually held against my will for 6 hours. And I had hundreds of photos and videos taken of me without my consent. And so about a week after the assault, I was sent a picture that was taken that night by him, and I wasn't home. My computer was here, and I have an Apple, I have a Mac, and so the messages come through the computer. My husband was using the computer at the time and saw the message come through. And so not only was that the way it was revealed, but My husband obviously initially, like any human would, jumped to conclusions. And when I came home, he had packed his bags for him and my daughter, and they were getting ready to walk out, and I just broke. Um, so it was a lot. And I say all the time to my clients, I feel like a lot of times the aftermath of trauma is even more traumatic than the event itself. And that was definitely the case for me. Things just spiraled from there over the course of the next year.
Wow. That wasn't going to be my guess as to how that happened. So.
No, not a common story.
No, and it's an unbelievable tale, and it's made worse by several factors, right? By one, the length of your relationship, the prolonged period of time of the abuse, essentially almost a blackmail type hostage taking situation that was being set up there with the pictures. And by virtue of the fact that you had somebody that there was a lot of trust in. I mean, on paper, this sounds like somebody that I would let watch my kids, so it's difficult. And so your husband didn't know at that time. And so he finds out. So tell me a little bit about that, because now not only are you healing from your individual trauma, you now are trying to hold your family together. I'm sure there's a lot of traumatic. I mean, that must have been just a ridiculously painful, I'm assuming, months of building back that trust.
Yeah. I mean, he ended up being wonderful because that's just who he is that night. And I didn't really have the capacity to talk about what happened, or, I was literally a shell of a person at that point in
Sure,
time.
you're going to lose your family. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. And he didn't, I mean, I was encouraged to go talk to somebody that I knew about it. And unfortunately, I was victim blamed, which is, what happens the majority of the time when a girl goes to tell someone. And so I got the whole, well, were you flirting with him? Have you ever given your husband a reason to think you're unfaithful?
These are from law enforcement people, I'm assuming?
Not law enforcement.
Okay.
It was actually somebody with a background in counseling.
Gotcha. Yeah, those guys. Yeah.
So, it was, I'm sure, very well intentioned. They're from a different generation. But at the same time, that's really what breaks someone is that there was no empathetic witness. Like there was no one there to actually support me the way that I needed to be supported. They tried.
How did you survive that? How did you make it through that? I mean, what were the resources? What were the strategies? Because I mean, I feel like you were probably full fight or flight mode for a long time. Like, how did you find the strength to get through that time?
I wanted to joke and say alcohol, but it's actually not. That's kind of for real. Um, I ended up kind of hanging out with a group of friends a lot that didn't know me prior to the assault, which I look back now and I'm like, my gosh, like what a strategy that was, right? Because I didn't have to pretend to be someone that I wasn't. I just was who I was. They did happen to be people that went out a lot and drank. And yeah, I mean, I did use alcohol. I used alcohol more so. I think people use alcohol for two reasons. It's either to feel nothing or to feel something, right? So in my case, I was already walking around so numb that alcohol for me it made me feel something. And I kind of see the way that I put myself in positions, albeit risky ones, but in an attempt to take back my control, just and find resolution in that. So the story gets crazier. The assault happened in July, and in October, so what? Not even, yeah, just a few months later. In the midst of all my binge drinking and all of that, I actually found out I was pregnant. So yeah, well, there goes that risky behavior for you. Um, and it was really hard. I immediately lost all of the coping mechanisms that I had been relying on, and I kind of stayed dissociated. Really through that whole pregnancy, through probably the majority of 2020. Um, yeah, it was a lot. I look back and sometimes I wonder how I survived myself.
Yeah. No, it's It's a serious question. It's not a therapy question. It's I'm being authentic, sitting here going, I don't know how somebody navigates that, right? Because you've got your internal pain. You've got, I'm sure you're tending to your husband and he's doing his best to connect with you and deal with your family. You're a mother during this time. And you're also not yet engaged in effective healing techniques, right? So you're a walking wounded, so to speak,
Yeah.
and yet the challenges sort of keep on coming, right? So how did your husband react to the news of the pregnancy, and what did he do that was supportive and helpful, or was he not helpful at first and then had to evolve into that? Like, what was his reaction to this?
Yeah. So he was really excited about the pregnancy. I think for him, it was probably felt like a glimmer, like something that was hopeful. And he saw me stop drinking and come. Now, what he didn't see was that I was still struggling just as much. But I think he thought at least she's not in physical danger anymore. Um, but he, we had to figure it out because he really wanted to talk through things, and that was his way of thinking he was helping, and it was the last thing that I wanted to do. It was very triggering, and you know how that goes when you're hurt like that. A lot of times you push away the people that you love most. Um, I didn't want them to hurt. I didn't want to be a burden on them. So we've had to learn together. He really, and that's one of the things I talk about with my clients is like, I think people recognize that they have support on the periphery, but nobody asks you, what does support actually look like to you? Like, what does it actually feel like to you? And so we've had to have a lot of those types of conversations.
Yeah, because it's so funny because we always get it in terms of like, well, trauma is individual, but we don't really recognize that healing can be individual or is just as individual, right? So you read an article in Psychology Today, you get a book, you play on the internet, and you go, well, here's 3 things that will help you, and you're like, it's doing the opposite. This is not helping me, right? Because that's not what works for you. And thank you for sharing all this because what's individual and personal is universal. And there's going to be so many people that are helped by hearing that, because there are people listening that are feeling that right now, that have probably gone through trauma and what do I do? And to see what you did and how you went through it. And also to hear that it wasn't like great. It wasn't like Monday something happened and Friday I went to a therapist and the next Monday it was all better. Like, bullshit. That's not how it works, Before we go on, I want to say a few words about Anew Behavioral Health. Anew Behavioral Health is an outpatient provider of mental health and substance abuse services in Ohio and New Hampshire. That means that Anew can successfully treat mental health and substance abuse issues or dual diagnosis if you're struggling with both. Their integrated approach allows for them to successfully address issues related to anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and really anything that stands between your life and the life you could be living. You really cannot bring them an issue that they have not successfully treated. They have also solved one of the biggest problems for people seeking help. They have a dedicated team waiting to hear from you at helpnow@anewbh.com. If you contact them today, within 24 hours, you will have heard back from, wait for this, a real live person, and will also have your first appointment scheduled at that time. So how do you contact them? Well, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, you're probably close to one of their local locations. You're welcome to go in. If not, you can always reach them online at anewbh.com. And if you're interested in services for you or loved one, use that address, helpnow@anewbh.com. So at the time, were you in therapy during this whole time when this is happening, or did you start that after the pregnancy?
So I was in, the assault happened in July. I started therapy in August. So yeah, I was in therapy through all of the drinking, through, my pregnancy, after I had her for a little while. And yeah, it was about 2 years before I think I just started looking at it going, I I'm doing the same thing. I keep showing up, but I'm not being given any actual tools to help myself heal. So I was just done.
Was there, you know, was there any part of that that was helpful? Like, was therapy initially helpful and then it just sort of lost its value over time? And then if that's the case, what signaled to you, okay, it's time to do something else? Was it just the repetition, or were there other signs that it was time to look elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, just to throw it out, I am a proponent of therapy. I think that it's beneficial for a lot of reasons. I think for me, the thing that it did the most was it was validating. She was able to tell me like, hey, you feel like you're crazy, but this is actually a very normal reaction for a sexual assault survivor. And there was no shame or judgment. It's like, what'd you do last night? Oh, I went out and, got drunk. And it's like, okay, well, tell me about that. There was no, I was made to feel normal, which was really nice. I think there was towards the end a lot of repetition. There was a lot of, um, she was a person of faith, and so am I. But when she found that out, there was a lot of tips like, you should listen to worship music before bed to avoid your PTSD nightmares, and you should pray more. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. Um, but with therapy, I think that's the other thing in our program that we do is we focus on building safety first because you can only heal as much as you can resource, and if you don't have a capacity for safety, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and that's a perfect transition because I want to learn more about this program. So, I'm still hurting. I've stabilized to a certain degree, but therapy's not helping me anymore. I'm having PTSD dreams that I'm like singing hymnals to try to to try to make go away. Kind of a variation of the old "pray the gay away," right? It's like sort of pray the scary away.
Exactly.
But so how did you find this program, or how did you find your way into the thing that would actually and ultimately work for you?
Yeah. So, good old love hate with social media. I don't love being on it, but I was on Instagram one day and I found Brittany Piper, who is the founder of the company that I work for HealingHub. And at the time, it wasn't the Healing Hub, it was called something else. She was just kind of on her own doing some of this coaching. And she is a sexual assault survivor as well. And I really resonated with a lot of I think it was the first time that I felt seen. Um she was sharing stories about how the hard stuff, like the stuff that no one wants to talk about for fear of judgment. Like she talked about how she turned to binge drinking. She was actually, at one point got into it with the law because of her just fight mode response to the assault. She was talking about things like hypersexualization when assault survivors, which those things aren't talked about. And I was like, wow, she sees people. And so I followed her for a while before entering into the program and kind of doing that work on my own.
And once you got in, what did the work look like?
Yeah, so it's very similar to what I do with clients now, which is kind of, full circle moment for me, but it's a lot of psychoeducation, because that's important. I think it's incredibly therapeutic to understand why you are the way you are. So how the nervous system interacts with trauma. We do a lot of nervous system regulation work. So mapping out, what are your triggers? What are your glimmers, which are the opposite? They're your cues of safety. What are your regulating resources? What do you look like? What do you think? What do you feel in your body, behave like in each of the nervous system states? Because without the awareness and being able to identify where you are, you can't help yourself. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of attachment work, how attachment interacts with trauma. We do inner child and internal family systems and parts work. And then at the end of the program, we just do a big integration phase where it's like, great, now you know all of this. How is that sustainable for you moving forward? We actually don't work with our clients past 6 months' time because it's completely, contradictive to this idea that we believe you have everything it takes to self-heal. So we don't want you to be codependent on us at a certain point.
Gotcha. And you guys I assume you're upfront with that from sort of day one, right? So
Yeah.
The clock is ticking, and
It's our philosophy.
that's interesting because I wonder what the effects of that are on a client or a patient, as far as getting serious and getting engaged quickly, right? Because it's time limited. But the flip side of that is, do they feel pressure? It's like, I'm not healing fast enough and I've only got, 2 more months with you. Does that I don't know, what's been your experience? Is it more helpful? I mean, you obviously believe in it because you do it. So
Yeah, I mean, the program itself is 6 months. They do have the option to continue work with us on we only do a biweekly basis, for a few months at a time, like 3 months at a time. Just again, to kind of reinforce that, you know, you don't it's hard, right? Because you don't wanna feel like you're pushing them out before they're ready. But I think also, if you have a hammock, you're gonna continue to lay in it. And it's like, it's we're not a hammock, we're a safety net. Like, we're here to catch you if you fall, but you've gotta at some point have faith and confidence in yourself that, like, you've got this.
do you think that, drinking and sort of distraction techniques were sort of your hammock for a period of time, and that the pregnancy sort of was your 6 months, like, okay, you've had your hammock time. Now that's cut off. And I don't know. It's just interesting how the universe works, right? Like sometimes you're given something that you don't want that actually ultimately turns out to be really great for you. So
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I had had 6 months. I think she only gave me 4. Um, but
yeah,
yeah,
right.
no, I mean, I do. I think that it was a really it was my numbing strategy, and I needed that. I mean, I don't know how any human right, it doesn't mean that I don't wanna say I regret it, because I don't. It doesn't mean that I love the way that I cope, but I'm here, it kept me here.
It's an interesting comment because I work with addiction a lot, and like I wonder why you would feel the need to regret it at all, right? Because you were drinking. Like, where does that come from? That's a regrettable activity. And I know that's sort of a scary thing to say because if somebody's dealing with addiction and things of that nature, of course, right? But it's always so funny to me that like, and I don't know the level of your use or whatever, but you're grabbing some drinks, you're going out, you're distracting yourself. Maybe you're getting drunk. I don't know. But the point of it is like you'll get judged right to your face for that by people who like also say, don't talk to me till I've had my coffee, or they're doing all these other types of substances that are serving a purpose for them too. So I just think that's so interesting that the remnants of that moralistic part of drinking, especially, like it always goes in the bad category. It always goes into the category of something you should apologize for. And I don't know. I don't understand that, especially if it's not serving that purpose. I don't know. I'm just talking out loud, but it's just sort of like I wonder why. And you must have felt that along the way. Like if you went out and drank, did you feel like you had to come home and apologize to your husband, or did you feel like you had to like tell your friends, "I'm sorry," but why are you sorry? You were hurt, and this helped you.
You're right, and I think I always say, like, the behavior doesn't matter. I mean, if it's drinking or if it's procrastinating, it's serving the same purpose, right? Like, it's doing the same thing. Yes, the repercussions may be different, but that doesn't make one worse than the other. Um, and I'll be honest, I was so dissociated at that time. I didn't give a crap about what I drank, who saw me drinking, where I but I think when I started to feel safety to the point where emotions surfaced and I started to process, then comes the shame, right? Then comes in all the shame, all of the because a lot of my core wounding has to do with earning love as well. And so that something like that was bad or unacceptable. And it's like if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. And so there was a lot of dealing with that. Yeah, on the healing side of it.
And so now we reconnect back to the military / law enforcement family that good gets you good, bad gets you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's rules. There's rules for a reason. Because even when you're telling that story now, it's like that's when the shame would come in. I still am left with the same question of, and maybe it's the oppositional child in me, but it's like, says who? Says who? Who says that's bad? Because I just don't think there's any good or bad behaviors in and of themselves, right? So exercise is good, right? Like running is good. All right. But what if you have to run every day or you can't feel okay? What if you run to the point where you break the bones in your feet? This happens. What if, as a woman, you run so much that you lose your period and you start to have, digestive issues and skeletal issues? This happens, right? And so now is running good, right? I don't know, right? And so I think it's the relationship between the person and the behavior that makes all the difference. So I don't know. Just a nickel's worth of free advice. That shame response, it's sort of like, I don't know. You were surviving. you were surviving. To stab a child with a sharp object is really, really bad, but there's nurses in every hospital giving shots, right? And so is it bad or is it good? Let's take a look at the bigger picture. So,
well, and behavior communication too, like it's just, I mean, I'm a former teacher. And so that's like, I said that all the time about my kids. It's like behavior is communication. When you are behaving in a certain way, it's because you don't have the proper tools to be able to regulate your emotions or process things right now. And so I didn't, at the time I didn't. And the thing is, we're so judgmental. I say we, just collectively, that you don't take time to think about what the context of the situation is. Why is she drink? Nobody said to me, wow, you don't usually drink. Why are you 105 pounds taking out 5 drinks and 8 shots in one night and then driving home? Like, no one, around me thought to check in or provide compassion, or it was just, oh, wow, like whispers of like, damn, she's really like going through her party phase right now. Like and it's, no, that doesn't just happen.
Yeah, let's judge her. Let's judge her real quick. Something's changed. Yeah, let's make up our own stories about why this is happening, and versus remaining curious and being a friend, which is somebody who'd be curious. What do you wish? So if we could go back now with your understanding and your knowledge and your experience, if we could go back to the day after this event, and we could talk to all of your loved ones, your husband, your friends, your family, what would you want them to know on the day after? Like, what do you wish they had done different, or what do you wish that they knew better at that time?
I think the biggest thing, and I say this all the time to, people, allies who are trying to support survivors, it's so important to let them lead. Um, they know better than anyone. Even if they don't think that they know, they do. And so if they're not wanting to talk, don't make them talk. If they're not ready to go to therapy, don't make them go to therapy. If they're not ready to cry about it, like, don't. I just wish, I wish people had actually asked me, what do you need in this moment? Like, is it space? Is it someone to talk to? Is it something to get angry about? Like, what is it that you truly need? Because so many people, it's more of a reflection on them, right? Like, when someone starts crying and we say, don't cry, that's not you. That's them. They lack the capacity. It's their discomfort with, your discomfort. And so I think just more open conversation about that. And it's just, I went to therapy for them. I didn't go to therapy for me. Me and therapy made them feel better. It didn't make me feel better. So yeah, I think just a lot of asking questions, and a lot of the safe space where there's no judgment. Because I didn't feel like I could tell anyone that I wanted to drink, or that because then there was just shame on top of shame. So yeah.
Which is so wild. Yeah, it's so wild because you think about any other kind of injury, right? If you'd been hit by a car, you would have had a line out your door. What do you need? What do you want? But because this involved sex and this involved, other now drinking and moralistic type things, now there's questioning. Now there's, the victim is never made to feel worse than when they're in a behavioral health or a mental health or addiction crisis, And you talked about that with that victim blaming and just how counterproductive that is. Same question, different target. What do you wish you could go and tell yourself the day after this happened? What do you wish, now that knowing what you know now, having been through all of this and the wisdom that you've acquired, how would you counsel yourself on the day after?
I I think I would just really try and pound it into my head that nothing nothing I did then could possibly be wrong. It No emotions are bad. Um I would thank myself for needing to be who I was in order to survive. Really kind of show forgiveness right up front for, I look back at that time and I think that there was a disconnect with myself, right? There's this like, that's not who I am as far as the trauma responses go. And I think we need to forgive ourselves for not having been who we truly are, because a lot of those things, they aren't authentic to who we are. Um, but yeah, I think I would just mainly really share that the things that I was feeling and what was to come, they weren't bad things. They were simply protective. I mean, they were keeping me here. Your nervous system doesn't know how to harm you. It just knows how to protect you and support you.
Yeah, I mean, how could you be the person that you were when you're no longer in the situation you were in, right? It's the classic soldier's dilemma. To be good at war, you have to become bad at peace, right? And you don't know the difference when you've been through something like that. So I don't know. I don't know if there is a core who we are. There's who we are in this reality. And then when your reality shifts so radically, so fast, new rules. You don't know who you're going to be in that situation. And we look back on things in history and people go, how could they do that? It's like, well, live in that time, in
You
that
weren't there.
situation, under that regime. And, I don't know, maybe it could. You made a couple mentions to like what trauma does to the nervous system. And I know that that's part of your program, so I'm not asking you to give away a free session, but for people maybe who have experienced this or taken a hit via the trauma, like what can they expect? What is that effect on their nervous system? Can you give us kind of a 101 on what to expect there?
Yeah, absolutely. Your nervous system is everybody has this like alarm, right? That's in their nervous system. And I tell clients this too. We're supposed to have it. It's supposed to be there. It's protective. But what happens when we've experienced trauma is there's a faulty alarm, and the alarm kind of constantly sounds. And so I always use the analogy of, if you have like a Ring doorbell camera for security to see who's at your door, but then one night a burglar breaks in through your windows. Now you're not just going to have security on your door, you're going to put sensors on your windows too, right? So our nervous system kind of starts working in overdrive because the perception of threat is a lot greater. But what happens is, when we're after trauma or a triggering moment, if our nervous system doesn't sense that there's safety in our environment following that, it will continue to remain triggered and traumatized. It's like the soldier that goes into battle and, suits up in all of his armor, and that's great, the night. And then when the war's over, if they fails to seek safety in its environment, you'll just continue to walk around with all of your armor on. And eventually it gets in the way of your living, which is how people end up in therapy, because they're like, holy crap, like this is heavy. I'm not thriving. I'm just surviving with all of this on. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the analogy that I use. We get stuck in those states of fight, flight, and freeze because that's our procedural pattern and that's what's kept us safe in the past.
What keeps you safe now? You seem that you've traveled a long way with this, making no assumptions about how good or bad, there's that word again, that you're doing, but you're helping others, which is an amazing gift. And there's something to that, right? Like addicts, when they get clean, they want to help other people get clean. When people survive sexual assault, they want to help other. So what are your safe spaces now? And what are your techniques or interventions or strategies for keeping that sense of safety for yourself now?
Yeah. I have a lot of them, thankfully. I think that we kind of skip over them on the day to day because we're not hyper vigilant about that. We're more so hyper vigilant about the anxiety and the things that are going wrong. But some of the common one, we call somatic work stupid simple because it is. It's things like being outside. It's things like movement. It's singing in the car. It's co-regulating with somebody safe. It's a hot cup of coffee between your hands and the way that it feels, right? It's just really connecting to the present moment, whether that's internally or externally, and taking the time to sit and notice how that feeling of okayness is showing up in your body. When you're anxious, you know how it shows up in your body, right? You're immediately like, oh, stomach's in knots, my heart's pounding, my chest is tight. But when things are okay, we just have a tendency to go like gloss over it because it's like, oh yeah, things are okay right now. But we have to sit and be just as hyper vigilant and savor those moments of safety and okayness in order for that to really start to change our procedural patterns for our nervous system to recognize that safety can feel like this too.
Yeah, and I think that that's where a lot of the work around gratitude and appreciation is showing up, right? It's just that sense of recognizing what happens day to day, and things go on. Yeah, I tell my kids, they get so annoyed at all the things I say, but one of the things I tell them all the time is, don't get used to this, right? So when we first moved to New England, so we were in Texas for a long time, moved to Ohio. Ohio is very flat. You move to New England and you do a lot of this. Wow, look at the mountains, look at the. And I would always tell my kids, and I still tell them, like, don't get used to this, right? Like, remember when, like, our backyard was the back of a farm and it was flat, and that's nice and beautiful in its own way too. But whatever those things in your environment that give you some joy or give you some hope, like, don't get used to them. Like, try to see them through new eyes every day, and they make fun of me for it. And my daughter at the time goes, why, are we moving again? So no, it's not because it's not because we're going to, don't get used to it so that you can maintain that sense of awe and appreciation. And so I'm talking about a mountain, you're talking about a warm cup of coffee. And I think they're equally soothing, equally awe-inspiring for sure. You made a comment earlier about, I'm not against talk therapy, even though you didn't have a particularly productive experience. There was some help, and you made a comment about, I went to make other people happy, which I was like, there's that people pleasing stuff. There's that be good enough, do what the good person would do. What do you see as the interplay between talk therapy and the work that you do? Are they good neighbors? Are they separate, distinct things? Is it one or the other? How do you see those two schools of thought working together?
Yeah. I have a lot of clients who, when they go through our program, they're continuing to work with a talk therapist, and doing CBT, and they sounds like wine and dinner. They pair well together.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I think that, I tell people you have to be very careful because it sounds crazy and people look at me like I have five heads, but not all therapists are trauma trained. Um, a lot of them are trauma informed, but not all of them are trauma trained. And so, for example, I right now in my program, this round I'm doing, I have a licensed therapist and I have a girl who has psychology degrees and very recent. And we're going over stuff. And she's like, I didn't learn that in school. Yeah, I didn't learn that. Yeah, they know that, but they don't teach that in school. And, the therapist who's in my group, she's saying the same thing. She's like, I want to start incorporating this because I know it works and I've seen it work. So I think therapy, it would be a beautiful blend if, you found someone trauma trained who also was very steeped in like the somatic work and doing like a body first approach. But yeah, there's room for everyone, right? And that's why it's not a competition. It's just us all working in the mental health field to support people.
Yeah, and I think we're learning that about the medical field. We're learning that about the mental health field. You do your master's in, under 2 years. And in that time, you're getting a glimpse at all the different therapies, theories related to change. You're definitely doing, sessions and practicing. But this idea that we come out with this, never-ending list of techniques to be applied, it doesn't exist. It's not real. Medicine's the same way. We have had psychiatrists that come on and, we would say like, well, tell me exactly how this medicine works. And they would say, well, sometimes it doesn't. We don't know. We know that. And I had a doctor on who said it's kind of a rule of thirds. Like a third of the time, it'll work beautifully and you nailed it. A third of the time, it'll do nothing, right? And then the third of the time, it'll actually make things worse. And to switch really quick. And so that's where that collaborative process, I think, is so important, and people feeling empowered to show up and advocate for themselves, and especially when things aren't working. Like, I just imagine you sitting there going like this, this is not working for me, right? But not feeling the permission, I guess, to speak up and go, I'm not benefiting from this. I want to do something else, and I wonder how much quicker you could have gotten to the right place if there had been that understanding that the therapist didn't have the perfect answer and was just waiting for the right moment to give it to you. You guys were searching together, so it's interesting. Well, listen, we are close on time, not immediate on time, but I do want to learn more about this. How, if people want to get connected and learn more about your work specifically, are there standard resources, like not just like your practice, but like somatic healing? Like, where would you point people to further their education and further their learning on that?
Yeah, so honestly, it's trending right now, which is a good thing, finally, after all of the decades. So really, I mean, just a quick search of anything somatic, but if people are interested in finding like somebody to work with in a face-to-face capacity that's a somatic practitioner, Somatic Experiencing International is a wonderful website to do that. And they actually have a locator, and there's a ton of resources and information on there. Um, and we're the Healing Hub, and our program is called the Body First Healing Program. But we're actually really one of the first institution to do this. We're kind of leading the way in it, and it's been a little scary, but like in an exciting kind of way. So yeah, we've helped hundreds of people now, and people are starting to kind of filter in, and we're starting to see it, spread out some even in the medical community. But books like, No Bad Parts is a great book by Richard Schwartz. Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I know a lot of people probably have heard of that one. Any of Gabor Mate's work, like those are all, Stephen Porges, those are all people that are just kind of lead, in the nervous system regulation and somatic work.
It's interesting because the Body Keeps the Score is the one that's pushed out front for like the trauma work, right? So adverse childhood experiences, and so people who are trauma informed are leaning on that resource. But the trauma trained is a different aspect of it. It's more on the action side. Tell me a little bit, not to go full commercial, but tell me a little bit more about Healing Hub and what your goal is for that. I mean, what is the Is there a specific mission? Is it we're going to get in there and help and see what happens? Like, what are your best hopes for the Healing Hub?
Yeah, so we honestly, our goal is to get people unstuck. If I were to just kind of put it simply, we find that the people that come to us, whether they've been in therapy or other modalities or not, because they're stuck, because they feel like they don't know how to get out. And so what we do is we just take a variety of all, it's a very diverse group, and we're a community of trauma survivors. The practitioners are all trauma survivors, and we've taken our lived experiences and our training and kind of built this out in a way that there are a ton of different modalities, because as you mentioned earlier, everybody's unique. Different modalities work for different people. There's general accountability. It's honestly, it's a lot of learning. There's a lot of lessons in our program. There's a lot of exercises for you to dive deeper into the work on your own. But we also offer a lot of like accountability, just one-on-one. So for example, my clients now have access to me Monday through Friday for text and voice support, because that's something that they felt they were missing in therapy. They're like, I got to write down all my problems and wait till next week. But ultimately, the goal is just to get people to a point where they feel like they're actually living their life, where they are no longer disconnected. They are present in the moment. They're not missing out on their own lives, and they're not just merely stuck in that chronic state of survival.
Do you have any, I know on the therapy side, we joke that, 1 out of 100, like nail it, right? Especially in addiction, but it's that one that kind of keeps you going. Do you have any sort of client successes that stand out, or any situations that are like, this is the one that even though they came in with A, B, and C, life is so good now? I mean, what are your sort of big successes there that keep you going?
Yeah. Gosh, I fortunately have had so many of them, and they keep me going. One of them has been with me. So she's continued on with like the one-on-one support, more so just because she wants it, not because she needs it. But she was someone who came in, a lot of trauma in her background. anxiety was complete, had a chokehold on her. Couldn't eat, was throwing up. She was so nauseous, catastrophic thinking, nightmares every single night. Like she was like, I don't want to live like this. She was like 22. She's like, I don't want my life to be like this. Um, and she went through the program. I mean, other than obviously we're human, she's going to have moments of anxiety, but she no longer has those crippling physical symptoms. She's had maybe two nightmares since the program ended a year and a half ago. So she's one of the ones that, like, her testimony of the way that it altered her life, even just physically, um, was huge. Absolutely huge. But yeah, I've got a lot of people that are out there embracing the present moment that never thought they would kind of climb their way out of the darkness.
Yeah, and I've shared on the show before about my struggles with anxiety and things like that, and I had a period of time, and that was the number one thought for me that was the most depressing, if you will, the most challenging was if I'm going to feel like this forever. Like, what is this going to be like if I feel like this forever? And thankfully, I was able to find relief. But at 22, to be having that thought, I can't imagine the relief and the freedom to not have to carry that forward for the rest of her life. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Well, listen, one fight I am going to pick with you. Okay. So you've got to stop calling yourself a former teacher, because it sounds like you are teaching people every day still. You have taught me so much during this time. I can see the teaching skills. They're still there. Like they're very present and very sharp. So I think you've got a beautiful program. And if you'll stop calling yourself a former teacher, I think that you've,
Thank you. I actually do teach now. I just teach college level. So
gotcha.
not so much the younger guys. I used to teach first through third. Really teaching adults is like, do we ever grow up anyway? Is being an adult an illusion? Like, I don't. So yeah, but thank you. I love it.
I was raised in the church, and I would think about the passages where they called us, we're all children of God. And I would think that was the worst thing in the world as I was growing up, and I was 13 and 16 and becoming a big boy. And, now I'm a lot older, and we are just children. We're all still children trying to find our way, for sure. So thank you for your work, and thank you for what you've done to find your way, and to help others find their way as well. It's an amazing story, and I appreciate you sharing it so much.
Thank you, Jayson. I appreciate you having me on here and giving me a platform to use my voice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How do we find you on socials?
So I am on TikTok and Instagram, I guess, are the two I would say the most. TikTok is.
And this is for healing content, and this is what you're talking about?
Yeah. Yep. I share bits and pieces of how healing relates to me personally, but yeah, it's all like valuable educational type content. Find me on Instagram at _heal with Meg _ at HealingHub Club is our HealingHub page. And then TikTok, I'm just at Meg Schnetzer. It's just my name.
I like the club part too. You're building a community, and that's something that sexual trauma and trauma work aside, post COVID, the world just as it's functioning, the dark side of social media, it's disconnected us, and we're all looking for that sense of community. So I love that you guys are building that club and that community. So, okay, well, we will part ways here, but thank you for your time. And for everybody listening at home, if you've been inspired by Meg's story, and you feel like your time for healing is now, you're aware of that mind-body connection. Everything will be below. Leo is here with me. I'm in good hands. So get all the information down below. I'm told to point down here. Something's going to happen down here. I don't know. It's good stuff. But take a look, and all of Meg's stuff is there. One quick question before I go. You work outside of Delaware? Like, are you telehealth and virtual as well? Or?
Oh yeah. So we're 100% virtual. We have actually 50% of my clients are international clients right now.
Gotcha. So even if you're not from Delaware, which is a tiny little state, but very beautiful, anywhere, if you need that help, you can reach out to Meg. If you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsors in New Behavioral Health. We do have psychiatrists. We do have nursing as well to support you, therapists, case managers, group, individual, family. We talked about that blend. We talked about that nice pairing between somatic healing and trauma training and traditional therapies. We have the traditional therapy needs met, the medical needs met as well. You can always find Anew at anewbh.com. Or if you need help right away, you can call 866-534-ANEW. You can send an email, helpnow@anewbh.com. So one final thanks to Meg. Appreciate you so much. One final thanks to Leo. Thank you for the help, sir. We're in good hands. And for everybody at home, again, time being your most valuable resource. Thank you for spending some of your time with us. Until next time, take care of yourself and definitely take care of each other. Thanks so much. Hey guys, although Through Help and Back is an excellent podcast with a lot of great ideas, I do want to let you know that in no way is Through Help and Back expected to be perceived as or relied upon in any way as specific medical advice or mental health advice for you personally. The information provided through Help and Back on our website or our podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment that can be provided by your own providers. Do not use our content in lieu of professional advice given by qualified medical professionals, and do not disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking professional advice because of the information you have read on our website, heard on our podcast, or otherwise received from us. Although we love discussing issues related to healthcare, mental health, and addiction, we are not providing direct healthcare, mental health care, medical, or nutrition therapy services. We're not attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure in any manner whatsoever any physical or psychological ailment, any mental or emotional issue, disease, or condition. We are not giving you specific medical, psychological, or religious advice whatsoever. Please take care of yourself and take care of others as you always seek the advice of your own medical providers and your own mental health providers regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health, or before implementing any recommendations or suggestions from us. These are ideas that have worked for other people. We think it's important to share them. We do not guarantee that they will work for you specifically. Do not stop taking any medications without speaking to your physician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, mental health provider, or any other healthcare or medical professional. And if you have or suspect that you have a medical or mental health issue, contact your own healthcare provider promptly. Also, one last thing, if you know or suspect that you are currently experiencing a crisis, it is absolutely imperative that you seek the advice of your doctor or other emergency healthcare services prior to ever thinking about using our content. We love the conversations. We're glad you're stopping by. We hope you take a lot from the content. But again, for your specific individual medical situation, please always seek quality personal care from your own providers. Do not let this information or this advice stand on its own. Thanks so much for listening.